Marcin will give a talk on trusting the words, trusting the truth, how theology created the first Christian philosophy. So now we will have Marcin's lecture displayed, and after it, we'll have a discussion. So please keep all your questions. We ask people watching us on YouTube and Facebook to write a comment, and we will ask these questions for you to Marcin.
Good morning. Good morning. The title of my presentation is Trusting the Words, Trusting the Truth, How Theology Created First Christian Philosophy. The question of how early Christians became interested in independent practice of philosophy is not easy to answer. The difficulty pertains not so much to facts, for we know quite well who among patristic authors relied in their statements on philosophies of various kinds, or who proposed original ideas of philosophical importance. The difficulty in answering this question consists rather in deciding what kinds of discussion of terms and ideas amount to a philosophical endeavor, and what turns those discussions into a truly Christian approach to philosophy. I cannot pretend that any definitive answer to this question is to be offered in my presentation. Rather, I want to turn your attention to a neglected author in whom, in my opinion, all constituents of Christian philosophy emerged together already in 6th century AD, and furthermore, in whom all those constituents can be considered as establishing together a paradigmatic whole. The author in question is Leontius of Jerusalem, a man writing polemical treatises against Miaphysitism and emerging monotheletism, most probably after the Second Council of Chalcedon. I have encountered his works thanks to participation in a project devoted to retracing the origins of the metaphysical notion of individual in Christological debates of early Byzantine period. It is in the book titled Discovery of Individual, which, as we hope, should be published quite soon, that detailed analysis both of his heritage and historical involvements will be presented to a larger public. The book is co-authored by the PI of the project Early Byzantine Metaphysics, and my wife, Anna Żyrkowa, and by me. Here, I would like only to pinpoint to some lessons that can be drawn from Leontius' approach to philosophy. It must be admitted that Leontius was a theologian and a polemist. His work, attacking most probably the disciples of Philoponus under the guise of Nestorians, were of great importance for settling clearly the issue of what hypostasis of Christ is. The formulations he elaborates in Contra Nestorianos and in Aporia can be found, however deprived of Leontius' rationale, in John of Damascus' Dialectics and in various passages of Maximus the Confessor. As a polemist, nevertheless, Leontius himself was forgotten, while his work is preserved in just one manuscript, a 19th century edition thereof. Its reader will encounter, especially in Contra Nestorianos, very long series of arguments deployed against the views of heretics, in which is put forward a rational defense of the truth of faith that two natures, human and divine, were united cat hypostasin, with respect or according to the hypostasis of the Christ. It is in those arguments that we can find a radically novel philosophy, dispersed in hundreds of separate remarks, yet argued for in each of those remarks, and constructed through vehement opposition not only to heretics' theological claims, but also to their underlying philosophical views about created reality. While one might be tempted to grant the name of philosophy only to a systematic body of doctrines and arguments, this is not what turns a doctrine or worldview into a philosophy. Rather, a philosophy emerges when theoretical wisdom about our world is sought as such, and when this wisdom is considered as obtained by the means of human cognitive powers. We can probably say that such an effort constitutes a Christian philosophy when the following criteria are met by a body of doctrines and arguments. It is a philosophy, first, developed by Christians, b. for Christian purposes, c. when a specifically Christian agenda is followed, d. when a philosophy whose proponents recur to a methodology both rational and e. expressing Christian attitude about the world, and f. a philosophy that proposes solution which could not originate outside Christian contexts. In my opinion, all this does take place in the work of Leontius of Jerusalem, and furthermore can be observed there in a paradigmatic form, in spite of the fact that the actual body of his teaching has to be disentangled from his theological arguments and recovered in a complex reconstructive effort. In the limited time we have here, I can only attempt to substantiate those claims by turning attention to just one among Leontius' arguments in Contra Nestorianus. The argument in question can be found in CN 247, where Leontius opposes the idea that the Christ is an individual, such as defined in Porphyry's Isagoge, whose logical discussions are taken by heretics as if they presented a metaphysical truth. For Leontius, I name opponents. Each individual belongs to a species, eidos, and thereby, as established by this species of form, must be deemed uniform or monoeides. Thus, there can be no individual endowed like Christ with multiplicity of forms. Leontius' answer to this charge is interesting in many respects. First and foremost, he assumes that he shares with the heretics the most fundamental faith about the Christ, that in him, as in the mediator, are united the natures of God and human. What he reproaches to his adversaries is rather narrow-mindedness, consisting on the one hand in their incapacity to treat the case of the Christ as supernatural, but on the other in not being able to grasp the logos of things dissimilar. In other terms, his opponents are not capable of accounting for dissimilarity and uniqueness of things. He shows them an example of such logos, of doubtlessly non-theological nature. However, out of exuberance, one can show you individuals which neither are simply uniform nor fall under one species, but which fall under different species. For in the case of bird phasions and such other similar realities, one cannot say that the singular individual is either something uniform or falls under one species, since it has not been ranged anywhere either among pure or among uncleansed species. Each species has taken subsistence in itself and not in other species. Thus, if the species of the Phasian bird is taken away from that species, also its constitution is taken away from it with respect of hypostasis. It can be therefore clearly concluded that there will be most novel individuals. They will be both one and many more similar ones, because a most novel natural species does not subsist in them. The argument is dense and difficult to decipher. It relies on the example of pheasants, called in antiquity Phasian birds, that is, birds originating from the banks of River Physis, nowadays Rioni in Georgia. What it appears to say is, however, quite simple. Even confirming those intuitions takes many pages of analysis in our book. Pheasants, as known to contemporary ornithologists, and apparently also to Leontius, constitute one species capable of breeding, in spite of many external differences of what one can consider to be its form. Divergence within a form does not mean, however, that the form is absent here. This is because if the form were taken away, the hypostasis of a given individual would become formless. It would lose its systasis, its constitution. Such individuals would become most novel, because all what such individual would be would come from absence of determination. Determination must exist individually, through each hypostasis, which is not a hypostasis a subsistence of nothing whatsoever. This must be the case in spite of the fact that an eidos, a species form, can be deemed to subsist in itself. Such subsistence, as other passages in Leontius suggest, consists in that a nature by itself is a logically consistent set of determinations, even if nature does not subsist on its own. This short argument completes and alludes to many statements and arguments of metaphysical character that can be found in Contra Nestorianos. Most important among them is recognizing that hypostasis of a particular reality is its moment of apostasis, separation, cesarment of this particular from other particulars by the mere fact of existence, hyparxis. Hypostasis is never identified by Leontius with particular or individual being. Rather, it is shown as a kind of created inner principle of existence and separation. As such, it requires for its constitution that there be a nature in each hypostatical being. Still, nature, in order to exist, requires a hypostasis. Nature needs to be unhypostasized, given existence in a hypostasis. Leontius makes it quite clear that without such concrete existence, there simply would be no nature, and that there can be no pure natures. Still, nature is the source of order and conformity in the world, and there is a common nature to a species of individuals, subsistent in itself, even if we cannot show that there is complete identity of form in a number of individuals of this species. All these conclusions are reached on the margins of theological discussions. Leontius does his best to present to his prospective readers that he does not engage in philosophical inquiry carried out for its own purposes. The philosophy he does not want to be confused with is the purely rational enterprise, commenting on the immanent causes of the world, which he knows it not from Philoponus himself, then at least from his less educated followers in the monasteries of Palestine. And yet, Leontius does make claims about created world, and does argue for his claims. He brings about the evidence of nature, known to him via examples drawn from human science and medicine. It appears, based on those examples, that he was acquainted with pieces of scientific factual knowledge that were lost later on. One can find in his arguments detailed medical references to how drugs are prepared, such drugs as eye drops that could actually work, according to our contemporary historians of medicine. From a philosophical point of view, his arguments rely on rationally organized sensual experience. The other source of his evidence is our language. Leontius clarifies such terms as nature, hypostasis, species, form, by pointing to everyday reference of those terms, such as the form of an actual species of animal, and more importantly, to the intuitions of the verb hyein and hyphistanai. He does not speak of nature in abstraction of the fact that things are born to be something, and of hypostasis in abstraction of the fact expressed by hyphistemi, the fact that something has received being and subsistence. This kind of evidence is put forward against speculation focused on abstract terms, with which philosophy in his era could have been too easily associated. This kind of stance, apparently built through an attitude which opposes common sense to speculation, ends up with a set of very subtle metaphysical proposals. Hypostasis and nature emerge, in a closer analysis, as two inner irreducible principles of created beings. Each of them is irreducible to the other, and does not cause the other. God, as Leontius says, is the only cause of hypostasis and nature. In this way, in spite of absence of a term such as individual being, a peculiarly Christian dialectic of the generic and the concrete, of nature and hypostasis emerges in Leontius. It's a peculiarly Christian dialectic because it is postulated first first and foremost, but the problems that arise in accounting for the Christ. In the physically concrete and existentially unique Christ, two natures are truly realized, that of a human and of the divine, as the Christ can be considered an instance of humanity, but is also one of the Trinity, which is one and only God. We can now return to the set of criteria put forward at the beginning of this presentation, through which a philosophical account of reality can be characterized as Christian philosophy. A. What Launchus proposes is a set of philosophical insights developed by Christians, that is, by people who share the faith in Jesus the Christ, truly God and truly human. His arguments assume that those to whom he wants to speak have this faith. His insights are proposed for Christian purposes. It's point B. He does not seek for wisdom for its own sake, but in order to resolve the doctrinal contentions dividing the Christians of his era. C. He follows a specifically Christian agenda, consisting in offering a clear account of the truths of faith, such an account that does not spur further debates and that does not contradict the meanings of our language. For Christian faith is expressed in ordinary language, and while it requires accepting facts that transcend nature, the words in which those facts are conveyed have their meanings rooted in our experience of nature. This kind of agenda is specific for Christian faith, in which the transcendent reality cannot be just expressed through Neoplatonic silence. In the Incarnation, the transcendent reality has taken flesh in the Christ, who lived with us and spoke to us in our language. D. Leontius' philosophical insights are built accordingly from a methodology that relies on trust in the language and in the contents of sensual cognition, but consists in an analytical approach to what intuitions of language and contents of sensual experience say us. A humility of human reason that does not dare to look for other ultimate causes than God himself, and does not offer an explanatory metaphysical system, so characteristic of his methodological stance, should not be confused with skepticism. Leontius does believe in the capacity of our reason to understand the created universe. He simply does not aspire at understanding that which transcends nature, even if he believes that correct theological account of transcendent truths, based on revelation, can be achieved. F. The philosophical solution that he proposes are uniquely Christian. For the dialectics of hypostasis and nature as two created principles of concrete reality is possible to be conceived of only when the ultimate arche is not contained within the world. Leontius is a philosopher of a world which is not self-explanatory, but can be truly spoken of even if systematic exposition of the causes of the universe may evade us. As such, in his focus on facts of experience and truth as vehicled in language, he is a paradigmatic Christian philosopher. He offers us the paradigm of Christian philosophical practice, even by his avoidance to be taken for a philosopher. Philosophy in this approach is a practice among many, one in which a Christian intellectuals need.
Thank you very much, Marcin, for this talk. That was Marcin Podbielski from Jesuit University Ignatianum. And now we can kick off with the questions. First, I will start with the questions on site. There are not many people here, but maybe. If there are any questions from the audience on site. And if there are no questions on site, we can move to the questions from the participants on WebEx. Just please unmute yourself and ask the questions to Marcin. Wojciech, please.
Trying to unmute myself. A very simple question, and perhaps. Can we first of your presentation how philosophy created the first Christian theology?
I'm not a theologian.
I can't say that I do understand how philosophy created theology, but I'm very much under the influence. When defining theology, I'm very much under the influence of the introduction of John of Damascus' Dialectics, which Anna translated some time ago into Polish, and I helped her with first sentence. It's a very beautiful sentence, actually 1 page long. And there, a theologian is not defined as a researcher or a scientist inquiring into the meanings. First and foremost, a theologian is someone who legatatheia, if we pronounce, or leitatheia, someone who says divine things, through whom the words of revelation take once more their shape. Because of that, a theologian can use philosophy if such words are necessary, but can use no words of philosophy. And first theologian, in this sense, someone who allows his mind to be informed by God and speak divine matters, first theologian is John the Evangelist, who does not need to know any kind of philosophy. Actually, if you read his gospel in Greek, it's very clear he had no formal instruction. He basically doesn't use any difficult grammar. His grammar is basically the grammar of modern Greek rather than ancient Greek. In spite of that, he is a theologian. So I don't think you need philosophy in order to create theology. You may need some philosophical words informing, some philosophical definitions informing your language. And ultimately it emerged that in definitions of faith, actually, in not dogmatic statement, but in statements of the councils, through which certain the formulations of faith were forbidden, actually, in order to produce these statements, especially negative statements about faith, and to propose a formula that does not lead to any kind of wrong conclusion, you need philosophical precision. And you need to engage in philosophy, either by using philosophies that already exist or by proposing a new set of terms based on a new set of insights. And the latter is first clearly and consciously done by three authors to whom who are the main heroes of our book, and most consciously probably by Launches of Jerusalem, who did create a new set of philosophical insights and reformulated existent philosophical terminology. This is how you use theology, unless you are someone like a natural theologian who moves to revealed philosophy. But it's a little bit different. This is the case of Justin de Martin. This is the case of Augustine, someone who was trained in philosophy, who could express his quest for wisdom in philosophical terms, but then found himself a higher wisdom. Still, even then, philosophy needs to be conceived of as a kind of practice. So you have a practice of theology, like in John the Evangelist. You have practice of philosophy, like in Socrates, continued, for instance, by St. Augustine, who was looking for wisdom for philosophy. You find yourself in the Socratic moment of being lost, not so much of ignorance, but being lost because of ignorance, being at a loss about yourself. And only then you grasp a different kind of wisdom. You grasp it through your faith. So, and then only theology starts, but it's like a path you follow in which you reach a point via philosophy and go further on through theology. Philosophical words stay with you, but they gain new meanings thanks to new experiences of faith. It's not, I don't think that philosophy can build theology. I think it can be used in various manners, but it's not necessary for theology at all, at least as long there are no so many doctrinal controversies as they arose in early Christianity.
Thank you very much for this. I can see one more question from Anna, and we received one more question from the YouTube stream. So please, Anna, first.
It's not a question, it's rather a remark to what Martin said. I think that philosophy is a necessary tool, not unnecessary. We cannot do theology without philosophy for very simple reason. We need to speak with each other. We need to define terms. We need to understand each other. It's not possible that we'll speak about, for instance, God's substance, and everyone and each of us would understand by substance something different. So it's a question of common language. But as I said, it's a necessary tool, but it's a tool only. If theology is an outcome of doing philosophy, something is wrong with this theology. It cannot be that a tail of dog starts to rule the dog. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. We received one question, and I will read it to you, Marcin. The question is, I am puzzled with your characteristics of the Christian philosophy. That is, point C, what is a Christian agenda specifically? And point F, what could be a sample solution proposed to make a world a better place, which could not have originated outside the Christian context? So I guess the question is about the point C and point F.
Okay. I must admit that what you see is a first sketch of the final chapter of our book, and that I devised all those criteria on the run when sketching the book. What I gave the name to of Christian agenda is a set of issues we need to resolve within Christianity, and not. If you're a philosopher, you're worried, you're concerned about how world exists, what things are, what substances are, whether there are substances, how we cognize the world. And these are not by their very essence Christian concerns. When you become a Christian, there emerge a number of specifically Christian intellectual concerns which need being answered. Those concerns are associated with what we believe in, which is very difficult to express, or especially with the Trinity, first. Second, it's extremely difficult to express who is Christ, not to grasp it, not to feel it, to express it. Third, matters such as relationship of human soul to God and his presence in us are extremely difficult to express. So naturally, when we are looking for language to express that, we focus ourselves on the part of reality that can give answer to those questions. On the one hand, it is a philosophical endeavor, because we are looking at this world and create senses of our language based on analysis of this world. On the other hand, we do have a very specific Christian agenda. If you go to Augustine, he's just a philosopher, he does quite a lot of purely philosophical speculation, amazing speculation. He does quite a lot of semantics, but you don't see direct link between his metaphysical or semantic concerns and specifically Christian intellectual problems. You see them in a larger context, but not directly. In Launches of Jerusalem, those link between Christian intellectual concern and what he focuses on is very visible. And historically, in Middle Ages, Christian philosophers will be following that path, very narrow understanding of Christian philosophy. Then, and obviously, later on, Christians will become more general philosophers.
It's like a kind of, so the conception I brought here is more descriptive than prescriptive. I don't say Christians must do this kind of philosophy like Leontius did. I'm saying that it's specifically Christian philosophy such as can be described. I'm acting here as a historian of philosophy. Now for F. Point F was, I need to read it, sorry for that. I must remind myself, specifically Christian attitude. And or answers which can answers in Christian context. So another time it is a descriptive point. I'm addressing here the classical Gilson's concept of Christian philosophy. He said that any Christian philosophy is philosophy that recognizes importance of faith and importance of revelation, the contents of revelation, in proposing solutions, in inspiring solutions. If you adopt a specifically Christian attitude about the world, like believing possibility of speaking truly, it's a belief, because we believe that Christ is not lying to us, like believing that we do live in this world physically, are not skeptical, but also being humble about because God is much greater than us and we can't understand everything. If we accept this stance, that everything was created, then some philosophical solutions are precluded while others show themselves up. So in metaphysical speculation, you are forbidden to look for the ultimate principle of things in this world. It's a part of Christian stance. But because of that, you can refine your thinking about created principles. And you can propose quite a different metaphysics. Another time, it is a descriptive term. Now going to your part about prescriptive proposals. How can we make the world a better place? I've lived some time in this world, and I can answer you as a philosopher. We can't do much about it. Sorry about that. 50 years ago, people have lived through a horrible experience of Second World War. Then the elites and many people, and many educated people got deeply afraid of who they are. But because of that, also a desire for good showed up in human souls. And you could listen yesterday to people who believed that, who wrote theology in this time or relied on the theology of 60s and 70s. People believed then that everyone has God in himself, that we can find God in ourselves, and because of that, we can become better. Actually, we're back to normal. Some people find God in themselves. Some people reject this divine spark, whatever it is, and are very happy about being back. And can say that no matter, I can be re-elected to some, many hundred thousands people can die, and it's not a problem. So in improving this world, philosophers, be sure of that, are helpless. Many of them did try it. And many of them are trying it again. If you open Zizek, he's very happy to be radical. But in a certain moment, he says, no, radicalism must go to the very end. So if you need to kill, don't be afraid of killing. Be proud of that. In this moment, you see that philosophical radicalism can lead you another time to bloodbath. So I don't believe in philosophy making the world better.
Okay.
Can Christianity make the world better? It's a different question.
Okay, thank you, Marcin, for this. We are running short of time, but the very last question, I will ask you to give a short answer, because I like this question we received. What would be Christian philosophy and Catholic philosophy? And we could also ask, would it be an evangelical philosophy or any other?
Would be Christian philosophy, Catholic philosophy? I think Christian philosophy There is kind of common dogmatic ground between Catholics and the Catholics and the Orthodox. And there is somewhat different ground between the evangelicals and Catholics. You can see it. I did work for some time in an evangelical institution. I could see that it was different. The view of who we are, the experiences of spiritual life are different. If your philosophy, like philosophy of Augustine, is based on phenomenology of your spiritual life, and in this way is fused with theology, then this will be different. And solutions about human nature may be different. If you are going back to this common world, a very confusing world of Catholics and Eastern Orthodoxy, I think this would be one philosophy in spite of different theologies. But if you're discussing things outside human nature, outside the issue of grace and living your spiritual life, outside of the issue of guilt, I think this would be one and the same philosophy.